Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses down on you, smothering every breath you take. It felt like the world had stopped moving, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I should have been used to the quiet. It was always like this when I came home, just me and the empty rooms. The creaks of the old house were the only sounds I could count on, but tonight there was something else. At first, I thought it was the wind, the kind that slips through the cracks in the window frame, whispering faintly in the corners of the room. But no, this was different. This was closer, more deliberate. It was a sound that seemed to reach out to me, like it was trying to tell me something. I held my breath. The sound came again, low and soft, like a breath just behind my ear. It can't be. I'm alone. But the voice, it was there. It spoke in a language I couldn't understand, yet somehow, I knew what it meant. It knows me. I pushed the thought aside, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the unease lingered. My heart was racing now, each beat a drum in my chest. I glanced at the clock. It was late, way past midnight. I shouldn't be scared, not at my age. But something about this was different. Something felt wrong. The house was old. The floorboards creaked, the walls groaned in the wind. I'd lived here for years, and I knew it like the back of my hand. But tonight, everything felt unfamiliar, foreign. The shadows seemed deeper, the corners darker. I stepped out of my bedroom and into the hallway. The air was thick, cold. The house was still, but the silence felt heavy. It was like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something. And then it came again. The whisper. This time, it was clearer, louder. It wasn't just a murmur, it was like someone was speaking directly to me. You've been running for so long. I froze, my blood turning cold. I had to be imagining it. I had to be. But then the whisper came again. You can't escape. I spun around, my eyes scanning the hallway. There was no one there. No one. The house was empty. I was alone. Wasn't I? My mind raced. I had to get out. I needed to leave. But the hallway stretched out before me, endless, like a tunnel that swallowed any sense of direction. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the air growing heavier with every breath I took. I turned to go back to my room, but then I heard it, something else, something subtle. A movement. A shift in the air. I could feel the weight of it behind me, a presence just out of sight. It wasn't a person, it was something else, something that didn't belong. I spun around, heart pounding in my throat. There was nothing there. But the feeling was real. It's here. It's watching me. The house felt alive. The shadows seemed to pulse, moving, watching, waiting. The whisper wasn't gone. It was all around me, louder now, seeping into the walls. You are not alone. I gripped the doorframe, trying to steady myself. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But then came another sound. A scraping. the faintest of noises, like fingernails dragging across wood. It was coming from behind the door. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. I had to open the door. I had to see. But every fiber of my being screamed for me to run, to escape whatever was in this house with me. I reached for the handle, but before I could turn it, the scraping sound grew louder, closer. You can't hide. The whisper, so close now, almost on top of me, was impossible to ignore. I froze. The air grew colder, thick with the weight of something I couldn't comprehend. The scraping sound became frantic, desperate. It was inside the room. Whatever it was getting closer. I closed my eyes for a moment, hoping that if I didn't look, it would all go away. But when I opened them again, the hallway had changed. It wasn't the same hallway I had walked down just moments ago. The walls were darker, the shadows longer. The door I had come from, my room, was no longer there. Just emptiness. Something moved in the distance, something tall and thin. The whispering was no longer distant, it was all around me, like a swarm of voices, each one telling me something different, something horrifying. I couldn't make it out, words slurred and tangled, but the feeling was the same, you are not alone. I felt a chill race down my spine as the floor beneath me creaked. I took a step forward, my legs shaking with every movement. Come closer. I didn't know why I moved, why I kept walking down the hallway, but my feet carried me. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if something was pulling me, dragging me further into the darkness. And then, as I passed by the old mirror at the end of the hall, I caught a glimpse of something, a face, not my own. It was distorted, twisted, with eyes that stared back at me, empty and cold. It knows me. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. It knows everything. I staggered away from the mirror, my heart slamming against my ribs. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the whispers, but I could still feel them echoing through the walls, through the floor, all around me. You're not alone. Come closer. I reached for the door, hands trembling, desperate to escape whatever was inside this house. But the door handle felt slick under my fingers, like the metal was slick with some sort of oil or sweat. I couldn't tell. The air had grown so thick, it felt like I was wading through water. I yanked the door open, but instead of the familiar view of my bedroom, I was met with an empty room. The walls were bare. The bed was gone. Everything I knew was gone. In its place, there was only darkness, stretching endlessly like the void. I stumbled back into the hallway, gasping. The house seemed to close in on me. The walls were no longer just walls. They were alive, pulsing, shifting, bending with the rhythm of the whispers. I couldn't tell where the sounds were coming from anymore. They surrounded me, suffocated me. I turned to look down the hallway again, trying to gather my bearings. But all I could see were shadows. They moved, twisted. The walls weren't just dark anymore. There were things in them. Things that scratched and slithered beneath the surface, trying to get out. I could feel them pressing against the walls, their presence like a weight I couldn't shake off. I closed my eyes. Just breathe. Just breathe. But the air was suffocating, thick with a sense of foreboding. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could barely move. Every inch of the house felt as if it were closing in on me, as if the space itself was shrinking, bending, twisting. And then, suddenly, the whispers stopped. For a moment, I thought I was safe. My heart slowed just a fraction. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe. The silence stretched on. Too long. The tension, the weight of something unseen pressing down on me, was unbearable. I knew, deep down, that something was wrong. That the silence was just the calm before the storm. That's when it came. The sound. A footstep. A single, deliberate footstep. The floorboard beneath me creaked. It was real. I wasn't imagining it. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The air around me grew even heavier, as if something had entered the space with me. I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel it, close. Too close. I whipped my head around, scanning the hallway. Nothing. Just shadows. No figure. No person. But I felt it. Another footstep. Closer this time. It was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was walking toward me. Each step echoed louder, until it was all I could hear, drowning out my frantic breathing. It's coming for me. I backed up slowly, my feet unwilling to make a sound on the creaking floor. But as I took a step back, something caught my eye, a shape moving at the end of the hallway. Just a blur, but unmistakable. A shadow. It wasn't natural. It was wrong. It moved in ways that defied logic, stretching and contorting unnaturally as it slowly approached me. The air around it seemed to warp, bending as if it were distorting reality itself. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The whispers were back, louder than ever, as if they were coming from inside my skull. You know what's coming. I turned on my heel and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that thing, from whatever it was that stalked me. My footsteps were silent, but my heart was pounding so loudly that I was sure anyone, or anything, could hear it. I skidded down the hallway, my eyes darting from one door to the next. Everything looked wrong. The familiar, comforting rooms were gone, replaced by walls that seemed to pulse and stretch like skin. I stopped at the end of the hallway, gasping for breath. The house felt wrong. The shadows, were they closer? Were they moving? I glanced over my shoulder. The figure was closer now. It was taller, too tall, its limbs twisted in grotesque angles. The shape of it was almost human, but not quite. I could see the outline of a face, a distorted, misshapen face, but there were no eyes. Just deep, empty sockets. It's coming for me. I stumbled backward, pressing myself against the wall, trying to find any escape. But there was nowhere to go. The shadows, the whispers, they were closing in, filling the space. They were everywhere. The whispers grew louder now, forming words I could understand. You can't run. It's too late. I had no choice but to face it. It was here. It was real. I turned toward the figure. It was so close now. So close I could hear its ragged breathing through the coldness that radiated off of it. The house groaned. The shadows grew darker, more oppressive. And then, finally, the figure spoke. Its voice wasn't a whisper. It wasn't even a voice. It was everything. It was the house itself, the walls, the air. You've always known, haven't you? I couldn't breathe. And then everything went black. I woke up with a jolt, my breath sharp and ragged, as though I had been underwater for too long. The silence around me was oppressive, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the suffocating silence of the house, it was the absence of everything. I wasn't sure where I was, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't in the same place I had been before. I blinked, adjusting my eyes to the dim light. It felt unnatural, as if the light wasn't coming from any real source, but from within the air itself. The room, if it could even be called that, was foreign to me. The walls were bare, crumbling at the edges, the plaster peeling away in thin, curling sheets. The floor was a patchwork of rotting wood and strange symbols etched into the surface, their meanings incomprehensible. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt heavy. There was a tightness in my chest, a sensation of pressure that I couldn't shake. It was like I was being watched, no, more than that. It was as if I was being felt, as if my very thoughts were being sifted through by something that could reach inside me. I looked around, panic rising in my throat. There was nothing in the room with me, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. It's here. I reached for my phone, but it was gone. The familiar weight of it wasn't in my pocket. My mind raced. Had I lost it in the chaos? No, I hadn't been thinking clearly when I ran. There had been no time to stop for anything. A rustling sound broke my thoughts. It was faint at first, like the sound of something brushing against fabric. But it grew louder, closer. Something's in here with me. I shot to my feet, my head spinning as I staggered toward the door. It was only then that I realized the door wasn't a door at all. It was just an opening in the wall, like an unfinished hole. The edges were jagged, raw, as though the house itself had opened up to swallow me whole. The sound grew louder, and I instinctively backed away. My feet scraped against the floor, the rough symbols beneath me making the sound like nails on a chalkboard. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were a whirlpool of confusion, too many questions, too many fears. The whispers were back. You know this place. The voice was cold, like a knife running along my skin. You've been here before. You've always been here. I clamped my hands to my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was inside my head now. My pulse raced, and my breath quickened. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. But the worst part was that I did know this place. I didn't recognize the room, but I recognized the feeling. It was the feeling I had before, the feeling that something was always just behind me, watching, waiting. The room began to shift around me, its edges warping, distorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The walls began to ripple like water disturbed by a stone, the air around me thickening with an unnatural cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows. At first, it was a blur, just a shape, a silhouette in the darkness. But as it drew closer, I could see it more clearly. The figure was tall, too tall, its limbs stretched in unnatural ways, and the face, it was a face, but not quite. It was as though it had been distorted, its features twisted like a melted mask. There were eyes, but they were black, empty holes. The face didn't blink. You thought you could leave. The voice was closer now, a whisper in my ear that wasn't just auditory, it was everywhere, vibrating through the floor, through the walls. The air itself seemed to speak, to hum with the presence of it. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat was dry, tight, as though I had been screaming for hours. I stumbled backward, but the figure followed, its long limbs reaching for me. Each step it took made the air grow colder, heavier, like the very space around it was warping. I couldn't escape. I couldn't think. My heart raced, and I could feel my legs giving way beneath me. I looked at the walls, the symbols that had been carved into the floor. They were moving now, shifting, rearranging themselves as if they had a mind of their own. The floor seemed to buckle under my weight, as if it were going to swallow me whole. The whispers grew louder. I could hear them more clearly now, each one more distinct, more urgent. You're not meant to be here. But I couldn't leave. The house was alive, and I was its prisoner. The figure reached for me, its fingers long and skeletal, reaching out to touch me. Its breath, or what I assumed was breath, came in ragged gasps, icy and heavy, like a winter storm in my very lungs. I flinched as its hand brushed against my cheek. The cold of it seeped into my skin, numbing me from the inside out. My vision blurred, and the edges of my mind began to unravel. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure stopped. It hovered there, inches away, its presence suffocating, pressing on me from every side. You've always been here, it whispered again, its voice like the scrape of bones on stone. I could feel my knees buckling. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to give in. But then, there was a sound. A loud, crashing noise that shook the room. I turned toward it, my heart pounding. The wall in front of me splintered, cracking apart like paper. Through the hole, I could see something. A light, blinding and bright, cutting through the darkness. Something was pulling me toward it. It was pulling me away from the figure, away from the suffocating cold. I didn't have a choice. I reached out, stumbling toward the light, my legs moving before my mind could catch up. The figure lunged for me, its hand outstretched, but I was already gone. The light swallowed me whole. And then, darkness. I woke up with a sudden gasp, my body jerking upright as though I had just emerged from the deepest part of a nightmare. The light was gone. It had been there, blinding and pure, but now I was submerged in thick, impenetrable darkness once again. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat thudding louder than the last. I could hear nothing but the deafening silence around me. Where am I? I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust my eyes, but there was nothing to see. My breath echoed in the hollow space. I tried to move, but something held me in place. I was lying on something cold, hard, and uneven. I attempted to sit up, my palms pressing against the rough surface beneath me, but the moment my fingers touched it, the air around me shifted. The smell was sharp, metallic, like blood. The thought hit me with the force of a punch, and I recoiled, quickly wiping my hands on my clothes as though I could rid myself of the feeling. Where am I? I whispered aloud, but the sound of my own voice was unnervingly soft. Almost like I was speaking underwater. A low creak echoed in the distance, cutting through the silence. My head whipped toward the sound, and my body froze. It came from somewhere far ahead of me, but it felt so close. As if the sound had traveled across every inch of space between us. I strained my ears, heart hammering in my chest. There was another noise, this time more distinct. A footstep. The faintest shuffle, like someone or something moving in the shadows. I'm not alone. The fear rushed back in full force, gripping my insides like icy fingers. My pulse quickened. The overwhelming pressure on my chest made it hard to breathe. I should move. I should run. But my legs felt heavy, sluggish, as if the very air in this place was slowing me down. There it was again, the scraping sound of something dragging against the floor. This time, closer. I had to get up. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I pushed myself to my feet. My legs shook beneath me, but I forced myself to take one step, then another. Each step echoed unnervingly in the quiet. The air around me felt thick, like it was pressing in on me from every side, urging me to stop, to stay still. But I couldn't stop. Not with that thing out there. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled forward, trying to find something, anything, solid to hold onto in the dark. The air felt wrong here. It was cold, unnaturally so, and the temperature seemed to fluctuate in waves. One moment it was freezing, the next it felt suffocatingly warm. My hand brushed against something hard and smooth, stone. I instinctively reached out to grip it. The coolness of the stone grounded me, but only for a moment. Then I heard it again, a low whisper, so faint I could barely make it out. The voice was distorted, like 1,000 voices layered on top of each other. "You can't leave." I froze. My blood ran cold. The voice was so clear. It had no echo, no distortion in its tone. It was as though the words were etched directly into my brain, so real that I could feel the coldness of the air it breathed. It knew me. It knew my fears, my weaknesses. It knew my deepest, darkest thoughts. My hands trembled as I clutched the stone harder, trying to steady myself. My mind spun, thoughts tangled, and I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. "No, this isn't real," I muttered to myself, but even as I said it, I felt a coldness creeping in, crawling under my skin. I took another step forward, but my legs felt like lead, my body aching with each movement. I was desperate to find my way out, but the darkness seemed endless, stretching on forever. The more I moved, the more the sense of being followed intensified. There was no escape. I turned around, desperate to see something familiar, anything that could give me a sense of direction. But there was nothing. No walls. No doors. No signs of any kind. How did I get here? I had been in the house, hadn't I? I had felt the house shifting, changing around me. But now, this wasn't a house. It was something else. Something that didn't belong to the real world. "You thought you could escape," the voice whispered again, this time louder. It came from all directions. I could feel it brushing against the walls, crawling through the air like a living thing, its cold touch slithering down my spine. I stumbled backward, my hand skimming across the rough surface of the stone as I tried to find my footing. I couldn't see anything. But the feeling, the presence, was undeniable. It was right there, surrounding me. It knew what I feared. It knew what I wanted to forget. The whispers grew louder. "You can't run from yourself." I gasped as the world around me suddenly shifted again. The stone under my fingertips morphed into something else, something soft, something alive. I recoiled, but before I could react, a pale, skeletal hand reached out from the shadows and grasped my wrist, its grip like ice. I screamed, the sound raw and primal, but it was swallowed immediately by the darkness. "You'll never be free." The voice came from the hand, or rather, from the thing that was attached to it. The fingers wrapped around my wrist with a bone-crushing force, pulling me toward it. And then, I saw its face. It wasn't human, but it was familiar. The eyes were black, swirling pits, and the skin stretched tight over bone, thin and translucent. The lips barely moved, but the words cut through me like a blade. "You're still here. and you always will be. I tried to pull away, to scream again, but it was like I was frozen in place. The air thickened. The shadows crept closer. The room, the place, it was changing. And I realized, in that moment of crushing terror, the truth. I had never left. I was still in the house. But now, it was not just the house that haunted me. It was everything. The hand around my wrist tightened, its icy grip sending a shock of cold through my body. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My breath hitched in my throat as I struggled to break free, but the more I pulled, the stronger the hold became. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat reverberating through my bones as I fought against the cold force. The thing's face was inches from mine now, its hollow eyes fixed on me, drawing me into their emptiness. The whispers swirled around me, echoing through my skull. It was as though the voice was inside my mind, filling the void, distorting my thoughts. "You've always been here," it hissed, its voice rasping and unnatural. The words slithered over my skin like the caress of something unclean. I couldn't understand. I couldn't think straight. The world was warping around me, twisting, stretching in unnatural shapes. The house, the room, the walls, they all seemed to bleed into one another, becoming a fluid mass of shadows and darkness. "This is your prison." A surge of panic rose in me, drying everything else. My pulse thudded in my ears as I clawed at the skeletal hand, trying to pry it off, but it only dug deeper into my skin. The cold was unbearable, sinking into my very bones. I yanked once more, with every ounce of strength I had left. For a moment, everything froze, time itself seemed to stretch in the silence. Then, with a sickening crack, the grip loosened. I stumbled backward, falling to the floor with a harsh thud. The darkness around me pressed in, suffocating. I gasped for air, trying to steady my breathing, but the air felt thick, like I was drowning in it. I pushed myself to my knees, trembling, my eyes darting around the room, desperate to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. The whispers were louder now, a chorus of voices that seemed to overlap, each one more insistent than the last. They weren't coming from any one direction, they surrounded me, closed in from every angle. They were in the air, in the walls, in my mind. You can't escape your past. You can't escape the darkness inside you. You've always known the truth. The words were so loud, so forceful, that they felt like a physical blow. My chest constricted with fear. The room began to sway around me, the edges of my vision blurring as if the walls were breathing. I tried to steady myself, but my hands were slick with sweat, and my body felt like it was being pulled in different directions. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the voices, trying to focus on something, anything other than the chaos around me. And then, in the suffocating silence that followed, I saw it. A flicker. At first, it was barely noticeable. Just a brief flash of light in the corner of my vision. But it was enough. I turned toward it, my breath catching as the shape became clearer. It was the door. The same door I had seen earlier, the one I thought I had left behind. But now, it was different. It wasn't just a door. It was an exit, an escape. I staggered toward it, my legs unsteady beneath me. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if they were trying to stop me, hold me back. But I couldn't let them. I couldn't stay here any longer, trapped in this endless nightmare. With a cry of desperation, I reached for the door, my hand trembling as I touched the cold handle. The moment my fingers brushed against it, the whispers stopped. The air around me grew still, and the weight that had been pressing on my chest lifted, if only for a moment. But before I could open the door, a voice, so clear, so close, whispered in my ear. "You can't leave. Not yet." I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. The room was empty as it had been before. The door behind me was gone. Vanished. I stood frozen in the darkness, my mind reeling. The ground beneath me seemed to shift again, like the very earth was alive, twisting, moving. The room began to blur, fading in and out of focus, until everything seemed to collapse into itself. The walls closed in, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. "You can't leave because you've never been anywhere." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for the first time, I understood. I understood the truth. This wasn't a house. It wasn't even a place. This was me. This was my mind. The darkness, the voices, the ever-changing reality, it was all a reflection of my own fears, my own guilt. I was trapped in the cage of my own mind, unable to escape the past that haunted me. The house was never the enemy. I was the enemy. I fell to my knees, my chest heaving as the weight of the realization crashed down on me. The whispers swirled around me, no longer voices of external threats, but the manifestation of my own self-loathing, my regrets, my unresolved pain. "You can't escape yourself." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the truth. There was no escape. There never had been. The darkness was mine, and it would never let me go. What if someone knew everything about you? Every secret, every lie, every fear. I was just another commuter that evening, lost in the endless shuffle of the subway crowd. The air was thick with the usual mix of damp clothing, stale breath, and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. I tried to ignore it, blaming my imagination. The train screeched to a stop, and I stepped into the car, finding a spot near the door. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing overhead like dying insects. People were glued to their phones, lost in their own little worlds. But then, I felt it. A stare. Not the casual glance of a stranger, not even the irritated look of someone needing more space. This was different. Heavy. Purposeful. I turned my head slightly, scanning the car. And then I saw him. A man, sitting across from me, staring directly into my eyes. He was average-looking, dark jacket, pale skin, thinning hair, but his gaze made my stomach tighten. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't aggression. It was recognition. As if he knew me. As if he had been waiting for me. I looked away, my pulse quickening. Maybe he had mistaken me for someone else. It happened. I exhaled, telling myself not to be paranoid. But then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost drowned out by the train's mechanical groan. I couldn't make out the words, but they came from his direction. I looked back. His lips weren't moving. Still, I heard it. Closer this time. My skin prickled. The train swayed, and I gripped the metal pole tighter. The air seemed thicker, pressing against my lungs. The lights flickered again. For a split second, I saw something. His face, wrong, distorted, shifting like a reflection in rippling water. Then the light steadied. His features were normal again, but his expression had changed. He was smiling. Not a friendly smile. Not even a cruel one, just a knowing one. And I realized he wasn't mistaken. He knew exactly who I was. And worse, he knew something I didn't. I forced myself to look away. My hands were damp, gripping the cold metal pole tighter than necessary. The subway car rocked slightly as it sped through the tunnel, the sound of metal grinding against metal filling the space. I tried to focus on something, anything other than that man, but I could feel his stare burning into me. I glanced at my reflection in the dark subway window. My own face looked back at me, pale and tense. The other passengers sat in their usual slouched postures, absorbed in their own worlds. Someone scrolled through their phone, another person leaned against the glass with their eyes closed. No one else seemed to notice him. Or maybe they were pretending not to. I swallowed. The train lurched slightly, and my shoulder bumped against the door. I turned my head just enough to check again. He hadn't moved. Still sitting. Still staring. Still smiling. I studied him more closely now. His face was normal, but there was something off about it. His eyes were too still, too focused. His smile didn't shift, didn't waver, as if it was carved onto his face. His skin looked almost too smooth under the harsh subway lights, like something artificial trying too hard to be real. My fingers twitched. I wanted to move, to put more distance between us, but the car was packed, and shifting positions would only make it obvious that he was getting to me. No, I wouldn't give him that. The train was slowing down, approaching the next station. I exhaled, relieved. I could switch cars. Or maybe even get off and wait for the next train. Then he did something that made my breath catch in my throat. He raised his hand. Slowly. Deliberately. And waved. Not a casual wave. Not a quick gesture. A slow, deliberate movement, as if he knew I was planning to leave. And worse, as if he was telling me it wouldn't matter. The doors hissed open. People shuffled in and out. My body screamed at me to move, to step off, to disappear into the crowd. But my legs refused to cooperate. Because at that moment, I heard something. A whisper. But this time, I understood the words. Not yet. It came from behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. But there was no one there, just a woman checking her watch, an old man adjusting his scarf, a teenager lost in his music. The train doors slid shut. We were moving again. And when I turned back toward the man, he was gone. Gone. My eyes darted across the subway car, scanning every seat, every standing passenger. But he wasn't there. I hadn't looked away for more than a second. I felt my heartbeat hammering in my chest, too fast, too hard. My breath came shallow, and my fingers, still gripping the pole, were cold and stiff. My mind raced for an explanation. Maybe he got off at the last stop. Maybe he slipped past me while I was distracted. But no! I would have seen him. I should have seen him. The train rumbled forward, the lights above flickering again, just for a moment. The air felt heavier now, like the ventilation system had failed, leaving only the warm, stale breath of too many passengers pressed too close together. And then, a shift. Something subtle. The kind of change you don't notice at first, but makes your instincts tighten, like an animal sensing a predator. The smell. That same metallic scent from before. Stronger now. Closer. I turned my head, pretending to stretch my neck, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. The passengers around me hadn't changed. The businessman scrolling through emails. The young woman adjusting her headphones. A mother with her toddler on her lap, gently rocking him as he dozed off. Normal. Too normal. I licked my lips, trying to steady myself. My stop was in a few more stations. I just had to hold on until then. But then I noticed something. The windows. They should have shown a reflection, the dull interior of the train mirrored against the darkness of the tunnels outside. But now they showed something else. Shapes. Faint at first. Blurred like smudges on the glass. Then, slowly, they sharpened. Figures. Tall, too tall. Standing in the darkness just beyond the tracks. Watching. My breath hitched. My fingers dug into the metal pole. No one else reacted. No one else seemed to see them. And then, a flicker. A single, jerky movement from one of the figures. A head tilting, too sharply, too fast. The train rattled over the tracks, a loud screech of metal on metal cutting through the silence. My ears rang. I blinked. The figures were gone. Only darkness remained beyond the glass. I swallowed hard, turning away from the window. My pulse pounded in my ears. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. The train began to slow again, approaching another station. My station. I had to get out. The overhead speakers crackled with static. The usual robotic voice announced a stop, distorted, warping in and out. Then, beneath the static, I heard it again. A whisper. Right behind me. So close I could feel the breath on my ear. Not yet. The doors slid open. I ran. I pushed past people as I stumbled onto the platform, my legs unsteady beneath me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs struggling to pull in the thick, heavy air. The scent of metal, of blood, still clung to the back of my throat. The moment my feet touched the concrete, I expected relief. Safety. A chance to breathe. But the feeling didn't come. The station was wrong. Too quiet. Even with the usual crowd moving around me, commuters hurrying home, students chatting in groups, a man in a suit checking his watch, it all felt off. Like a backdrop in a stage play, familiar yet hollow. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a sickly yellow glow over the tiled floor. I turned back toward the train. The doors were still open. Inside, the passengers sat in eerie stillness, unmoving. No one stood. No one shifted in their seat. Just waiting. Then, just as the doors began to slide shut, I saw him. The man. The one who had been staring at me. He was inside the car again, standing now. His expression was unchanged, calm, knowing. His lips curled into that same unsettling smile. But his eyes, they weren't on me anymore. They were looking past me. Behind me. The train doors closed. The subway jerked forward, disappearing down the tunnel. I exhaled, my shoulders slumping, exhaustion creeping in. Maybe it was over. Maybe I was safe now. But then I felt it. A presence. Something just beyond my line of sight. The whisper had come from behind me. Slowly, Stiffly, I turned my head. The station stretched out before me, the usual signs and advertisements lining the walls. The people moved as they always did, walking toward the exits, waiting for the next train. But at the far end of the platform, near the tunnel's edge, someone was standing still. Too still. A figure. Tall. Unmoving. Its shape was wrong. At first, my mind tried to force it into something familiar, just another commuter waiting for the train. But the longer I stared, the harder it became to convince myself. Its limbs were too long, its posture too rigid, and its face, I couldn't see it. The shadows clung to it unnaturally, swallowing every feature. But I felt its gaze. A chill crawled up my spine. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get out, to leave this place behind and never look back. But I couldn't move. Then, a flicker, like a bad signal on an old television screen. For a split second, the figure seemed closer. Not walking, not stepping forward. Just closer. The station lights flickered. The air grew thick, pressing against my skin. Another flicker. Closer. My breath hitched. No one else reacted. No one else saw it. I took a step back, my legs finally obeying. The figure remained still. But I knew it was waiting for me. Somewhere deep inside, I understood. Leading the train hadn't changed anything. Whatever this was, whoever they weren't done with me yet. I backed away, forcing my legs to move despite the icy dread sinking into my bones. The air in the station felt wrong, thick, heavy, almost solid. Like it was pressing against my skin, resisting every movement. The figure at the edge of the platform remained still. Watching. Waiting. I tore my gaze away and focused on the exit. A staircase at the far end of the platform led up to the street. People were moving toward it, their footsteps echoing in dull, lifeless thuds. If I could just reach those stairs, get out of this station, get into the open air. A whisper. Not from behind me this time. From ahead. Coming from the stairs. Not yet. I froze. My breath hitched. My fingers clenched into fists. No. No, I wasn't playing this game. I wasn't going to let my mind trap me in this nightmare. I forced my feet forward. One step. Then another. I passed a man in a suit, his face illuminated by the dull glow of his phone. A woman in a heavy coat, a shopping bag dangling from her wrist. A teenage boy leaning against the tiled wall, headphones on. Normal. All normal. So why did it feel like none of them were real? I kept walking, my pulse pounding in my ears. The metal stairs were just a few feet away now. I could see the top, the faint glow of the city beyond. Almost there. Then, a hand. Cold, dry, impossibly strong. It wrapped around my wrist. I gasped, yanking my arm back, stumbling. My foot slipped against the slick tile, and I nearly lost my balance. The man in the suit was looking at me now. His phone screen cast strange, sharp shadows across his face. His fingers, too long, too pale, were gripping my wrist. Tight. Too tight. I tried to pull away, but his grip didn't budge. His lips parted. His mouth moved. But his voice, It came from behind me. "You're not supposed to leave." A chill shot through my spine. My stomach turned to ice. I looked into his eyes. They weren't eyes. Just darkness. Deep. Empty. Endless. The air around me grew thicker, heavier. The buzz of the fluorescent lights twisted into something else, something almost like breathing. The other passengers were watching now. All of them. Their faces half lit, half hidden in shadow. Their eyes empty, hollow, wrong. I wrenched my arm free and stumbled backward. My head swam. My vision blurred at the edges. I turned. Ran. The tiled floor stretched beneath me in an endless blur. My breath came in ragged gasps. I shoved past people, things that no longer felt human. The figure from the platform, gone. But I knew. It wasn't far. The stairs. Just reached the stairs. I lunged forward, my hand grasping the cold metal railing as I pulled myself up. My legs burned. The exit was just ahead. I could see the light, the city, the real world. Not yet. The whisper came from everywhere. And then, the lights died. Everything plunged into darkness. A second. 2 seconds. A breath. Then, the lights flickered back on. I was standing in the subway car again. The same cold metal pulled beneath my fingers. The same dull hum of the train moving along the tracks. As if I had never left. My stomach twisted. My breath hitched. No. No, that wasn't possible. I turned my head. And there he was. Sitting across from me. Smiling. Like he had been there the whole time. Like he had never left. Like I had never left. My hands trembled. The train rumbled forward. The station, the one I had just escaped, was disappearing into the darkness behind us. I opened my mouth. No words came out. The man tilted his head slightly, his grin never faltering. Then, he raised his hand and waved. Slow, deliberate, and I finally understood. I was never getting off this train. Have you ever looked into a mirror for too long? It starts as something normal, a quick glance, a routine check. But the longer you stare, the stranger it feels. Like the reflection isn't just you, but something else. Something watching. I never used to think about it much. Mirrors were just mirrors. Until the night I saw it. Or rather, the night I didn't see myself at all. It started 2 weeks ago. I had been having trouble sleeping. Stress, maybe. Work had been piling up, and my mind felt like a tangled mess of deadlines and unfinished tasks. Every night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside my window. The walls of my apartment felt smaller, closing in bit by bit. That night, I got up to splash some water on my face. My bathroom was small, just a narrow space with an old mirror above the sink. The kind that had seen years of steam and soap stains, its edges slightly warped from moisture. I turned on the light. And then, I wasn't there. The mirror showed the bathroom behind me. The sink, the pale yellow tiles, the closed shower curtain. But not me. For a second, my brain refused to process it. Maybe I was just standing at the wrong angle. Maybe the glass was too old, too faded. I leaned forward. Nothing. The longer I stared, the more the emptiness in the mirror seemed to spread, stretching beyond the edges of the glass, as if it could reach out and swallow the whole room. My fingers gripped the edge of the sink. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then, just as suddenly, I was back. My reflection blinked at me, wide-eyed and pale. My chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. It must have been the light, or my tired eyes playing tricks on me. I turned off the bathroom light and went back to bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But deep down, I already knew. It was just the beginning. I woke up gasping. The kind of gasp that rips through your throat, like you've been drowning in something unseen. My sheets were damp with sweat, my heart racing so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't remember what had scared me. A nightmare? The details were already slipping away, but the feeling remained, a deep, gnawing unease lodged in my chest like a splinter. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face. My skin felt cold, clammy. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the street lamp outside, its orange light stretching through the blinds, cutting the room into uneven slashes of shadow and warmth. Then I noticed it. The bathroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it before going to bed. Positive. A sick feeling curled in my stomach. The air in my apartment felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, like the silence was pressing in on me. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Swinging my legs over the side of the bed, I stood up. My bare feet met the cool floor as I took a slow step forward. The hallway stretched before me, leading to the open bathroom door. The mirror was waiting. Even in the darkness, I could see it. A faint glint of glass reflecting the nothingness of the room. I reached for the light switch. My fingers trembled as I flicked it on. The light buzzed to life. I was there. My reflection stood in the mirror, exactly where it should be. Same tired eyes, same messy hair. Same hollow expression that hadn't quite left me since the night before. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe I had left the door open. Maybe I had imagined everything. I was just overtired. Stressed. My mind playing tricks on me. I turned away. Then I heard it. A soft tap. Not from the window. Not from the walls. From the mirror. My stomach twisted into a knot. Slowly, as if something deep inside me already knew what I would see, I turned back. My reflection was gone. The mirror was empty. Not just empty, wrong. It wasn't just the absence of my image. It was the way the bathroom behind me looked slightly off. The colors muted, the shadows deeper. The edges of the room blurred, as if the space inside the glass was shifting, breathing. I took a step back. And then, something moved. Not me. Not my reflection. Something else. Something deep within the mirror, shifting just beyond the surface, its presence pressing against the glass like a trapped breath. I couldn't move. Couldn't blink. And then, in the silence, it happened again. A tap. From the other side. The sound didn't belong in my bathroom. It was too deliberate. Too precise. Like the slow, measured knock of someone waiting to be let in. I stopped breathing. My skin prickled with cold sweat as I stared into the mirror, into the empty space where I should have been. The air around me felt thick, charged, as if the very room was holding its breath. Then, another tap. Louder this time. The sound sent a tremor through my spine, and before I could think, I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. My hands caught the doorframe, steadying myself as I fought the rising panic in my chest. This isn't real. It couldn't be real. The rational part of my mind tried to take control, searching for an explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the glass? A warped reflection? Maybe the mirror was just old, flawed. But deep down, I knew better. The space inside the mirror wasn't just empty, it was waiting. I reached for the bathroom light switch, my fingers fumbling. My hand was shaking, and I hated that. I hated how my own fear made me weak. Click. The light went out. Darkness swallowed the room. I swore under my breath, flicking the switch again. Nothing. My pulse pounded in my ears as my eyes struggled to adjust. The only light came from the street lamp outside, its dim glow stretching into the hallway, stopping just short of the bathroom door. The mirror sat in the shadows, a wide, gaping void. And then, movement. Something shifted inside the glass. A slow, rippling distortion, like the surface of water when touched. The breath hitched in my throat. I didn't want to see. I couldn't see. But my body betrayed me. My eyes locked onto the mirror as the darkness inside it deepened, stretched, unfurled into something almost human. A shape. A figure. It was standing where I should have been. I couldn't make out its features. Its form was blurred, like a silhouette submerged in deep water. But it was there, staring back at me with a stillness that sent ice through my veins. And then it did something impossible. It stepped forward. Not toward me. Not within the mirror. It stepped out. The surface of the glass rippled like liquid as a pale, shapeless foot pressed onto the tile floor. My tile floor. I choked on a scream, stumbling backward, my hands grasping at empty air. My heel caught on the doorframe, and I fell hard onto the hallway floor, my back slamming against the wood. Pain shot through me, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on the thing emerging from the mirror, its body unfolding unnaturally, limbs twisting into place. And then, the light flickered back on. And it was gone. The mirror reflected the bathroom perfectly. The sink. The shower curtain. The pale yellow tiles. And me. I was back. Chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Eyes wide, hollow, staring at my own reflection. But something was wrong. My reflection wasn't shaking. I was. My hands trembled against the floor, my breath uneven. But the me in the mirror remained still, calm, watching. And then, it smiled. I couldn't move. My breath felt trapped in my throat as I stared at the reflection, at myself, or at least, what was supposed to be me. But the thing in the mirror wasn't copying me anymore. It stood still, expressionless. Then, slowly, that eerie, unnatural smile widened, stretching just a little too far. A sharp, electric terror shot through my body. I scrambled to my feet, nearly slipping on the cold floor. My eyes never left the mirror. My reflection didn't mirror my movement. It just stood there, watching, smiling. A distant thought whispered in my mind, "Run." But I didn't. I forced myself to stay. Forced myself to breathe, to think, to understand. I was losing my mind. I had to be. This was a hallucination. A stress response. Maybe lack of sleep, maybe something else. But it wasn't real. I took a slow, shaky step forward, raising my hand. The reflection didn't move. My fingers hovered inches from the glass, my skin tingling with dread. The air around me felt heavier, thicker, as if the room itself was pressing in on me. "Who are you?" My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. The thing in the mirror blinked. A slow, deliberate movement. And then its lips parted. No sound came out. But I saw it. It mouthed a single word. "You." A sharp knock at the front door shattered the silence. I gasped, jerking back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The world snapped into focus, the dim hallway, the bathroom tiles under my feet, the weight of my own body. For a moment, I stood frozen between two realities. The impossible horror of the mirror and the normalcy of a visitor at my door. Another knock. Louder this time. My hand whipped toward the sound, and for the first time, I felt something like relief. A tangible, solid distraction. A reminder that there was still something real outside of this nightmare. I turned away from the mirror. And in that single moment, I felt it. A shift. A breath of movement behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't. I rushed down the hallway, my pulse hammering in my ears. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath my frantic steps as I reached the front door. Another knock. I hesitated. Something felt wrong. The knocking was steady. Too steady. The rhythm identical each time, like a mechanical repetition rather than a natural, impatient human gesture. I swallowed hard and placed my hand on the doorknob. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice still unsteady. Silence. The air in the apartment was thick, suffocating. I felt watched. Not just from behind me, but from all around, as if the very walls were leaning in, listening. I glanced over my shoulder. The hallway was empty. But I knew. I knew the thing in the mirror wasn't just in the mirror anymore. Another knock. I squeezed my eyes shut. My fingers tightened around the cold metal of the doorknob. And then, a voice. Low. Hollow. Coming from the other side of the door. "Let me in." I froze. The voice that came from the other side of the door wasn't human. It wasn't even close. It was low, rasping, like something dragging its words through the gravel. But worse, much worse, it sounded familiar. My hand trembled against the doorknob, the metal cold, biting into my skin. "Let me in." The words echoed in my head, rattling like a loose window in a storm. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding, my head spinning. I turned my head slowly, just enough to see the faint reflection in the hall mirror across from me. Nothing. No movement. No smiling face. Yet, I felt it. The presence. Like a shadow stretching across the room. The knocking stopped. The silence was more suffocating than the knocking had ever been. I felt the weight of it pressing against my chest, and I knew that if I opened that door, if I let whatever was on the other side in, I would never escape. I took a deep breath, tried to steady myself. It's not real. The thought flickered like a candle flame, weak and fragile. None of this is real. but the air smelled different. There was something in it now, an acrid scent that burned my nostrils, making my skin crawl. I glanced around the room, desperate to find some sense of logic. Then, I heard it. A soft rustling, like the shuffling of feet across the floor behind me. I whirled around. Empty. But my reflection in the mirror wasn't empty. It was there. The thing that had once just stood there, motionless, now had its back to me. Slowly, like it was savoring my panic, it turned its head. Its eyes locked onto mine. Those eyes were mine. But they weren't. The reflection grinned. I staggered back, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The room felt like it was shrinking around me. The edges of my vision blurred, as if the very walls were collapsing, folding in on themselves. I was trapped, not just in this room, but in a reflection. I couldn't tell if I was looking at myself or something else entirely. I turned back to the door. The voice again, louder now, closer. Let me in. I didn't know what to do. My body was moving on its own now, adrenaline forcing my legs to take step after step toward the door. I reached for the knob again, and I could feel the coldness seep into my bones. I had to know. I had to see what was on the other side. With one quick, terrified motion, I yanked open the door. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But it wasn't. The silence was wrong. It was as though the sound had been swallowed up by the walls, and the air itself felt too thick to breathe. It was oppressive, suffocating. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. And then I saw it. The reflection, standing at the end of the hallway. Not in the mirror. Standing there. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was real. And it was smiling at me. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.